How's that?
Again, I don't know where that will go. He is also a professional biologist, but he's the former chair of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta. So the 69 counties and MDs in Alberta have an organization called RMA, Rural Municipalities of Alberta. And he was the president of that entire organization. So he had the ear of the province, of the premier. He hasn't been the president since November. He's past president, but they all know who Paul is. And so I want you to, we are just so grateful that he's talking on our behalf and giving us good information tonight. So once he gets his mic all sorted out, we'll give him a good hand.
I'm good. I'm going to get wrapped in this like a cat.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect. Well, great. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me back? Cat lovers. Raise your hand if you're a cat lover. Raise your hand if you're a dog lover. Anybody here have a chinchilla? No? Good, good. So you can hear me at the back? I am a little bit loud. And so I'm going to really watch the clock. Anybody that's seen me speak before, I really like to hear myself speak. So this could go on for 4 or 5 hours. I'm not kidding, actually. And that's actually happened. So a little bit of background about myself, and some folks don't know who I am. So in 2007, I lied to my wife. I'll admit it right now. Because what I said to her is I said, you know, I'm thinking of running for municipal office. It won't take up much of my time. So I was just acclaimed for my 6th term. I haven't campaigned since 2007. So I've been doing this for a little while. Someone needs to run against me because I'm not sure if I suck or not. So you missed this window, but get me the next time. And so politics is my hobby. I've been a professional biologist for 30 years. I actually deal with watershed issues, and I really look at this from an ecological standpoint. So I'm kind of the person that wants to make sure that the bugs and the bunnies and the fish have enough water. At the same time, I do work on the industry side too as well. And I think, and I will say what Minister Nixon had said is that you are being heard. And I think that, you know, filling the room today I think is important. I think that those grassroots conversations, and some of what I'm saying is going to be a little bit depressing, but I'm going to also have a bit of a call to action, because I hate for you to walk out of here and go, I don't know what the hell he said, but I know I should do this. And I think that we need to, one thing we need to make sure, and what my grandfather always taught me, is the only person to take care of you is you. Because trust me, someone in Edmonton was not paying attention to the issues we're dealing with. But they're paying attention now. And it's because you folks here, I think, is an important message too as well. So I don't live very far from here. My neighbors, Baytex, have been putting me to sleep with their fracking job. I've just gently, thank you, Marie. It was kept me asleep. But you know what? You know, I've been involved with the oil and gas industry my whole adult life. Definitely supportive of it. I didn't come in here in an electric car. I did come here with a hybrid, so I'm on both sides. So I can make everyone happy. But I think it's important to understand that we have some economic decisions, but there's some choices that can be made, and I think those choices we can come up with today. So hopefully in my presentation, and I will have time for questions at the back, and hopefully nobody's videotaping this because this thing looks stupid. So people are agreeing, yeah, it does look stupid for sure.
Garth Brooks.
That's right, exactly, yeah, and I'll just look out into the nowhere. That's what Garth does. And so we'll see if my thing works. Did it change yet? There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the facts. And like I said, I have a different view of this. I'm not looking at this as a hydrologist or hydrogeologist. I'm not looking at this from an oil and gas production standpoint. I'm really looking at it from a landscape standpoint, because I do think we're all folks that, you know, we were actually stewards of the land. And we actually see that. And you folks here, you know, there's dugouts that are dry right now. You know there was a swamp you should have bought because you could farm that bad boy now. You know it. You missed it. You could have bought it for really cheap. And the reality is we're all seeing this right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process. I could burn up hours about what the regulatory process is, but I think that really the most important thing is the call to action piece and really understanding what exactly can be done. Now, water allocation is a big discussion. There's a lot of folks involved in both groundwater, surface water, and this is an important slide, and I will provide this to anybody. I don't think any of this is magic or special, but understanding how this is allotted. And you know what? When there's times of drought, wow, do fingers start getting pointed at each other. Because I hear industry, oil and gas folks saying the agriculture people are using a lot more, and the agriculture people saying that we keep water in the system. And when you get scarcity, you start seeing those fights. And the reality is we all rely on water. We rely on groundwater, we rely on surface water, and ultimately, as these all break out, we're all tied to all of these. And it's important to understand that. But I think the Red Deer watershed, I think, is quite interesting because, as you can see, the way the allocation is, especially when you start looking at the petrochemical and the oil and gas industry, the Red Deer has a very large component that's tied to industrial development. Now, my neighbors are extremely rich, Lacombe County. That's why they have Lacombe County Award. They have Joffrey. They have money in their pockets right now. Watch them. It just falls out. That's how much tax they have. Ponoka County, we're barely paying the bills, people. Barely. But the reality is that there is a large demand on the Red Deer, but at the same time, I work in this watershed and have been for 30 years, and see the demands on that. Who's using all the water? It's all irrigation down there. Just got back from there yesterday. They're in a drought, and they continue to be in a drought, and they continue to have their struggles. We're starting to see those struggles now, and I'll talk a little bit about where those struggles are going to as well. Anybody that's seen this presentation before, my jokes are the same, but the slides might be different. So I'll be telling the same thing. But this is a very interesting slide because some of these basins are closed and some of them are still open. And the Red Deer is at that edge. It's at that edge, and it might actually be a closed basin next little while. And so, why am I here? So one of the conversations is, what's the county's role? There's section 619 of the Municipal Government Act, and I think Minister Nixon alluded to it, that one of the things is that I have limitations as a Ponoka County representative. I have no jurisdiction as it relates to utilities as well as the energy industry. So section 619 means that those departments, the AR, the AUC, NRCB, they actually supersede any of our decision-making process. So the only authority municipalities have is road use. That is our only functional role for oil and gas activity. And that's important to understand because that's also the same conversation related to the water allocation conversation, because Alberta Environment's had all their power and authority pulled into the AR, and I'll talk about that soon. So road use authority is our only jurisdiction. Ponoka County's been told to stay in their lane, and in fact, actually, the AR actually met with Ponoka County, and we had a stay in your lane meeting. As you can tell, I'm not good at that. And at the same time, I actually think this conversation is our lane, because actually under the Municipal Government Act, it's important for me to address the well-being of the environment. And additionally, I need to foster economic activity. So I do promote oil and gas activity, I promote agriculture. At the same time, I want to maintain safe and viable communities. So I do believe this is my lane, and definitely I could be told it's not. But I think there's really more to it than that. That, you know, when someone pulls you aside, what's the priorities in Ponoka County, specifically, and our overriding is to create a healthy environment that has a healthy natural environment. So this is, again, our lane. And I can be told energy is paramount, and I'll be quite honest with you, I've worked for doing this job for a little bit while, and the golden egg in government is energy. Energy brings in all the money, and they throw their weight around up there. Trust me, I've seen it. I've seen it in many instances, but at the same time, when your door starts getting knocked on by some of these other ministries, some of the MLAs, some of the folks that even talked to you today, people start to pay attention. And the other important thing is that we want to make sure, and this is this last point, this is the most important thing, is we acknowledge the right of the owner for their real property and the use of enjoyment of said property. So your right to enjoy your property, your peace and enjoyment of your property is important. So any belief that you can do whatever you want on your land, you can't, because you got to make sure what your neighbors agree with. So for example, you can have a shooting range / kindergarten. Probably not a successful business model. You could try it. Actually, it's probably in Texas. I'll be honest with you. I think that would exist in Texas. But the reality is that you need to ensure that you're not impacting your neighbors. So we actually have public hearings. We have a public process to discuss what your impacts are. And we make those decisions. And any of the folks here that are municipal elected officials, we use that hearing process. And it's important because that public witnessing conversation is an important part of the decision making. Now, the reason why I bring that up is that in the instance of the AR, they do not have that public process. They do not have a hearing process. They're not looking. It's a written process. And it's really a paper shuffling process. And so the real question is, in this case, intensive industrial activity is being placed into municipalities. In this case, there's one that occurred in Ponoka County that's near a game farm. That would require significant and maybe impossible conditions if it was placed by a municipal authority. And that's an important consideration because the reality is that that wasn't considered. So you'd have a statutory referral process and the counties would be involved. The reason why I bring this up is I don't know if you folks have noticed this, but this isn't your mom and dad's fracks, you guys. 500 vehicles a day potentially, double pups, significant amount of water. This Duvernay play is a serious economic opportunity for this region, and I will not deny that. I think we need to support it. At the same time, this is not your mom and dad's frack. The level of intensity that's required for these is significant, and is so significant that I actually believe that the regulations do not address the concerns. That's why we have about 100 people here today. And we need to talk a little bit about that. And I know those discussions are occurring. I think the influence is occurring, but at the same time, I wouldn't rest. I think I'd continue on, and hopefully the call to action that I bring up here today brings you to those conditions. So why am I also here? I'm here because I'm the same as you folks. Annual precipitation has been dropping. This is Leedale. I have other data. The fact is, folks, unless it really, really rains in the next few months, and it's not going to, we are in a 10-year drought. So that's a big deal. And you know what's interesting is, I brought that information up to officials at the AR, and they said, oh, we didn't know that. I am not kidding. I'm going, I live in a cow pasture, and I figured it out, so how come you didn't figure it out? And it wasn't a consideration. Well, there's important pieces to that, and I'll talk quite a bit about that. But the mean annual precipitation for the good folks in Leedale is 520 millimeters. It hasn't been since 2016 that they've actually had anything that's exceeded precipitation. Our friend, Your Worship Hansen, you folks did a study on groundwater penetration from rainwater, 4%. Only 4% of rain goes in to become your well water. So you've got a 10-year drought. Where's your recharge occurring? So you guys are seeing this. So all of our wells, and you know what, I admit it, I was bragging. I was like 25 gallons per minute kind of guy. I had water spewing out the top. My top level of my well was really high. It is not there right now. Because after 10 years of drought, this is a stress system, folks, a very stressed system. Very important to understand that Medicine Hat's about 447 millimeters, so look at a few of these days. You know, I'm going to have prickly pear cactus in my place. Does everybody know where Grimshaw is? That's up by Peace River. Grimshaw for the last 3 years has actually had the same precipitation as Medicine Hat. They're not used to that up there, and as the minister was mentioning, Grand Prairie, and that is why you're seeing this fire pressure, and there's pockets of these. This is actually one of the worst pockets, and actually there's part of this region that are some of the worst in the province. And so, this is, I think this was Hespero. Where is Hespero? I looked at...
Southwest of Eckville. On Highway 11, west of Eckville.
Is it in God's country? Yes. Okay, awesome, good.
It's in Lacombe County.
How can we all live in God's country? Wait, I didn't notice that.
That's Lacombe County.
That's Lacombe County. Right. So the taxes are high and the service is low? I didn't say it. I've been reading it on campaign literature. I don't know what's going on. And so again, the same situation. And I'll be honest with you. I've been looking at this data. And the reason why I even look at this data, I'm not a meteorologist. Yes. I actually look at this data because it's actually how I determine the health of a habitat. So I actually study beavers and bears and moose, and I look at plants. I'm pretty cool, really. You guys saw The Martian. That botanist was pretty awesome, right? He raised potatoes with his own poop, though. Nobody seen the movie? You're going to want to watch it now, right? And so the reality is we're all in the same boat together. So we've got this system that's stressed. And what is a drought? A drought is a deficiency of precipitation over an extended period of time. And it's usually, basically, to be honest with you, 2 seasons is enough to call it a drought. We're in year 10. And so we're not getting there. So I actually did some math because I'm a bit of a nerd and got a lot of free time. I need probably a 3rd or 4th job. And I was trying to find out when was the last time we had Snowmageddon. You guys remember that? Snowmageddon. Like you were talking. That wasn't enough snow to recharge the system, you guys. 1.8 meters sustained through the winter may give us a 20% recharge on our groundwater. That's how low we are. So we need to have repeated moisture. So I can sit here and talk about what's causing it, and guess what? That's not going to change the conversation. We need to have resiliency in the system. We need to consider this when we make decisions. We need to look at the background situation. We need to look at the demands on the system, I think is critically important. Now, I provided Nicole Smith, and I want to thank Nicole Smith because she provided me this data. So this is my Christmas gift to you, is I processed your data. And I didn't know what else to get you. By the way, one thing I learned about Nicole is don't get her mad. Just to be clear, I used to be scared of Butch. I'm not scared of Butch anymore. But this data came from Alberta Environment, but I think it's important data because I know there's a lot of lines on this, but I put a little line there, that's when the drought occurred. And so the red line and the blue line is actually demands on the system. So the blue one is AER allocations. There is a bit of a game that was played, that water used to be used for industrial and now it's used under the AER. But long story short, you can see at the end there, we have a drought, the system's getting stressed, but we're having licenses go out the door. And that's where people are going, what's going on? You know, or what's happening here? And I think it's important to understand that, then again, this is a variable system. And all you gotta do is kind of squint a little bit, and you can see this is the flow of the medicine. But you guys can see it slanting a little bit, right? It's dropping a little bit. And it has those years, you remember? You know, I don't remember what the weather was yesterday, so I don't know what it was like a year ago. But the reality, too, is this is annual. So this is annual flow. And so again, a stressed system. So the demand is increasing, the system is stressed, and what you get to this situation. Now the conversation is who owns the water? And as Minister Nixon, who used to be the Environment Minister, the authority over water, the water policy is held by Alberta Environment. So Rebecca Schultz, Minister Schultz, is who you've been talking to, and definitely I've been actually on her advisory committee for water, so she manages the policy. But the interesting conversation is, how does that interact? Well, there's two regulators for water. There's the AER, the Alberta Energy Regulator, and Alberta Environment. And this is our important call to action, that those are two different things. That Alberta Energy Regulator is responsible for all aspects of oil and gas. And boy, will they let you know it. At the same time, imagine that they're making decisions, and their decisions are a narrow width, looking at oil and gas. They're not talking about agricultural use of water. They weren't looking actually at drought. They are actually looking at a lens that's quite a bit narrower. And I think it's important to understand that these policy pieces do exist. Now, I've heard stories that we audit the system and we're ensure they're complying with policy. And I'll show you how that complying with policy works, because it's a really big discussion, is that how do you create data and use data to help make a decision that you want to make? And I'll show you some of those slides. Again, a gift to you, Nicole, because you sent me a spreadsheet, and thanks. So this is one of their spreadsheets that they send. So I actually, on purpose, made this crappy because the blue lines actually extend past the ceiling here. That's how much water is available in the system. And so you can see the little tiny lines on the bottom there. That's how much that's being given out as licenses. So there's tons of water in the system. What is your problem? Honestly, there is so much water, you guys. Like, look how much water there is. Like, there's tons. We should be issuing licenses. There is so much water. See, the problem with this interpretation is that's fine if water stays still. If water's moving, that kind of doesn't work. And the reality is that when you start increasing those allocations, because again, 2016 we had drought, allocations are increasing, water is not staying in the place. And you have a stress system. And so how that actually manifests itself is this, is that allocations are increasing, and I said we're in a drought, we're in a 10-year drought, allocations are increasing, you're going to have these interface, this loggerhead going on. You're going to have 100 people in the Gilby Hall. Pizza was awesome, by the way, thank you for that. But you guys would have been watching the baseball game tonight, if anybody knew who baseball was. I've never watched baseball, but all of a sudden I'm a baseball fan. So, and I hope they get as many touchdowns as possible. So, it is Toronto, so it's always hard for me because I don't really like Toronto, but so the other conversations are tied to, these are annual licenses, those are allocations, and then there's water reported. Now, I will say one thing, that things are improving, and I do see some policy pieces occurring, but I want to brag a little bit about Alberta. Alberta actually has the highest per capita post-secondary education. We have the highest per capita trades. I'm talking North America. I'm not talking just Canada. We actually have the most engineers per capita. Actually, you folks, even though it's a little tough to pay the bills right now, we're kind of one of the richest people in North America. But we do two things by paper that nobody else does. Literally no one else. We're the last people to use a paper version land titles, and we're the last idiots to do paper version water licenses. We're the only ones that do not have a digital system for those two things. It's incredible we don't. Now those are being fixed, but that's literally where we were. So this reporting of water use, yeah, really? On a napkin? Was it really required? Was it voluntary? Could you really trust it? And I think that there's an important message that comes through that, is really what's the message that's tied to that. Now, this, again, probably a little tricky to see because I did want to include the data going back in time because I didn't want to treat this as a blip. Yes?
Could you elaborate that on what you mean by paper
Paper system. So we do not have a digital system at any time knows how much water is being used and actually how licensed are. So you would think so, we do not. And I'm talking other uses, not industry, but I'm talking system as a whole. So a lot of people have licenses that are not reporting on license use. And I'll be honest with you, there was a time that they were thinking they'd close the system, which they did in some places, and people may or may not have went and got water licenses just because, and have never used them. Because they thought, if I never get it now, I'll never get it again. So that exists in the system. I know there's reporting by industry, but trust me, it's not the entire system. And it is a system. We need to treat it as a system. Now, I think if you can tell the color, so basically what's really being shown in this diagram here is sort of this crappy olive green, and no offense if you really like olive green, just shows the AER applications. And so this upswing is not agricultural demand. This upswing is strictly AER submissions of the AER applications, and you can see the real blip in 2024. You folks know this, the lay flat pipe, what my horse thinks is an anaconda in the ditch, which, by the way, they've never figured it out. I walk them by it every day. They still think it's a frickin' snake. There's a reason why horses don't run the world, because they're stupid. But it's important to understand that that demand is increasing and those demands are occurring. And there's some conversation, and I want to show you one graphic because I think it's fascinating, is these are the total volumes by industry too as well. And I could get buried in the weeds here, but if you actually look at some of the total allocations and you actually look at AP totals, how many licenses are issued is a really different conversation between volume, and I'll show you in really cool pie charts here. So, because I really like pie charts, probably because I'm not very smart and I like colors. And so in this case, these are the number of licenses being issued. So you can see that, you know, the AER really is not giving out a ton of licenses compared to AP. I mean, there are tons of licenses being issued by Alberta Environment. But this is the volume difference. So 119 licenses went out. This is in this watershed. 119 licenses went out, and of those, there was 5 million cubic meters went out under an AER application. So you can see that a small number of licenses, but the volume is exponential. Again, this is their data. So this isn't my data. This is data that's been shared to Nicole, and then I've called it my own, and I'm going to sell it now. Yeah. No, I'll give this to you. Okay. Yeah. Well, as long as Nicole lets you have it. And this is 1990. Like, does anybody remember 1990? Yeah, I was a lot better looking back then. And so 1990, you look at the difference. Well, really, the demands are quite a bit different, right? So, and you folks know this. You've seen this. And so I'm going to be honest with you. The reason why we need to meet today, because this is only the beginning. And the investment that's going on in this play is significant, and it's important to understand that these volumes could triple, quadruple the demand of volumes, and we need to talk about closed system loops and supporting solutions and finding ways to do that, because we are just at the beginning of what might be one of the last plays in this region. And I think it's important to understand that this has really helped build a lot of the municipalities here, but where do we go from here? And I think that we need to understand that we have an agency that's hammering out licenses and definitely basically not turning down licenses, to be clear, for the most part. And we need to make sure that that is occurring in the public interest. We need to ensure it's transparent. We need to understand what exactly is going on all systems. And I think it's important, probably the most important thing to understand is that as time goes on, we're going to start having loggerheads. Because if we have another 10 years of drought, we have a bit of a problem even for managing livestock on the ground. And you folks know this. Some of your dugouts are low. You know, I only had 20 cow-calf pairs, and I had to take from one dugout to another dugout. I've never had to do that. And I honestly bought swamp. I'm not that bright. And my land is low and has been wet. And now I'm a genius because my land is dry and produces quite well. And I got it for really cheap. And so really it's important to understand that where this demand is, and I think that as Minister Nixon had said, the Water Act is amazing. And you know what? I'll tell you right now, the environmental regulations related to oil and gas are the best in the world. Trust me, I've reviewed it. I've worked all over the place. I've been in the north, I've been in the south. And it's important to understand that even our Water Act is extremely solid. But it's how it interfaces with the regulations. That's the important conversation to have. How it's actually being utilized, how it's interpreted for its use, I think is important. And I think one thing to realize too is that this is my biggest complaint. Again, I'm going back to how we make decisions. So we announce our meetings, I have a public hearing, I have a decision, and the AR, in their genius, says what you should do every day is you should wake up every day, and before you start your coffee maker, you should hop onto the AR's One Stop and just see what's going on in your neighborhood. Let's see who's drilling, who's handing out water, who's using resources, because that's how everyone starts their day. And that's literally the regulated system that the AR has created. And I've told Mr. Jean that is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Because it is honestly the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Having a belief that you have a public resource use, and you have to go check out a website. I live in rural Alberta, and some people don't have internet. Some people aren't good at computers. Like, it's just one of those situations. Well, how can you actually, and my kids only use their phone. I doubt it even uses on their phone. They can even use it on their phone. So it's important to understand that that's where you can find applications. I think it sucks. If we can change that, I think it'd go a far way. The other thing too is there isn't a complaint process. Now, I've been a bit of an advocate of the complaint process, and what I've noticed is I've probably been a poor advocate of it, because I think I gave it way more credit than it deserves. Because again, we're coming back to that public interest conversation. There's decisions that are being made in the public interest, and whether your interest as an individual, because you should enjoy your peace and enjoyment, you should actually have some ways to address your issues. I'm not quite sure if what's being interpreted that are your issues and the public interest is the same thing as I think it is. And I think that the pressure that you can place on as a group like this, again going back to the watershed issues, but the watershed issues are just 1 degree from your personal rights as an individual. To enjoy your farm, to enjoy your lifestyle, to make investments in agriculture, I think it's critically important. And that balancing act is important. Now, I'm casting a lot of blame at the AR, and because you know what? I believe they deserve it. Because I'm actually, when I talk to industry, I'll tell you right now, I worked in the oil and gas industry for years. I've yet to meet an evil person in industry. I've met a lot of people that work for shareholders. And if you work for a shareholder, what do? I have $1. And how do I spend that $1, Mr. Shareholder? And Mr. Shareholder says, I want that $1 back because I gave you that $1. And if you have to make a decision as a business person and you're being told, you got to be as cheap as possible, and you can't, it's hard for you to go back to your shareholder and say, I want to raise the bar and do things better. That is a tough decision when your shareholder wants that $1. And that is the struggle that the industry folks, and I'm compassionate to what you folks have to deal with, is that you have to be beholden to that system. And that system is tough to work in because somebody wants their money back. And that's why I blame the AR. Because you can only go as far in many cases as the bar that's been set by the regulator. That's as far as you can push it. And so to look for alternatives, to look for different ways, that falls on the regulator, because I think industry in most cases, they would do that if that's what they had to do. And that's where I think we need to balance the system. And I think blaming industry is probably not where we put our energy. We should talk about the regulator and see if we can put that pressure on too as well. And I know they should be here to defend themselves, but they won't show up.
They were invited.
Yeah, and they won't show up. It's not that I'm intimidating. I don't think they have a travel budget. And I'm not kidding, actually. I think they don't have a travel budget. So there is process for statements of concern. I think it's important to document. Again, my biggest problem with this system is that it's really not a public witnessing system. I like public discourse. I think that we need to support that. And I think we need to go back to the good old days. And Terry, probably back in the good old days, you had a more public process back in the good old days. Now it's a paper pushing process, and there's really not that many hearings. And I could pound on these guys a lot longer, but I'm going to go a little further again here. And so what's the future? So again, let's talk about this Duvernay play. In Ponoka County, 68% of the taxes are paid by oil and gas. And in fact, actually, like farmland in Ponoka County is $1 million a year. That's the taxes that come from farmland. Oil and gas is about $9 million. So if I tripled the taxes in farmland, and I could probably say that out loud now because I was acclaimed. If I make it to Monday, right, if I say that, I still can't replace what oil and gas is doing. I could triple every person in Ponoka County's taxes and I still can't replace. So I need to recognize that. I need to recognize this is a significant contributor to our tax base. At the same time, I think this is our last chance. The reality is that some of my old fields in Ponoka County are horrible, horrible. Every company that picks up one in my field goes bankrupt. every 3 years, whoever picks it up is driven into the ground. And I think that we need to recognize that this play is significant. And it's right on top of the Paskapoo Formation. It's right on top of where hundreds of thousands of us get our water. So those two pieces are going to be a conflict, and it's important to understand that we have some issues related to those two. So we need to protect the Paskapoo Formation. We need to protect industry, and we need to balance that. And I think that really having the watershed folks working with industry, working with the regulator, that's the solution to a lot of this. This is probably about a 20-year play, could be 30 years. It's going to ebb and flow, but they're here for a long time. We're going to be neighbors for a long time. And in order for us to be neighbors, I mean, we're going to have to find ways to work together. And it gets complex. It's going to get complex. If we go into another 10 years of drought, what's the result of that situation? Now, I think that, looking at this play, these numbers are actually a little wrong. I think they got bumped up a little higher, actually. I noticed some natural gas play. So this is a serious amount of resource. The reality is that these reserves really, to be quite honest, in this area will be an economic driver for the next 20 years. And we need to recognize that. We need to support it. And at the same time, I'm not going anywhere. So I got to find ways to deal with this because the system is stressed. And you can't fix this. There's no way to fix this situation. There's no way to fix this system that's actually under severe stress. And you folks, and this was a little bit old data. This was probably from the spring. But I was pulling people's groundwater wells and finding out what the static levels were of the wells, and they're all low. And I had a lady call me just literally the other day, and I think we need to have more public education around wells. I do believe Minister Schultz is going to go around and start reboot that program on taking care of your wells, because this lady called me the other day and she said, "My well's not working. I think it's the guys that are fracking. What do I do?" And I said, "Well, my well's working fine and I'm between you and the frack, so let's talk a little bit more about your well. When's the last time you shocked your well?" She goes, "What is that?" Okay, we have a problem. "When is the last time you changed your pressure tank?" And that would be what part of the system? And at the same time, have you ever changed your well? And she'd never actually changed her well. And I said, "Congratulations." She said, "Why would you say congratulations? My well's broken." I said, "You got 20 years out of a well. The next one's not going to last as long, but you're going to need to go buy a new pressure system. You're going to have to buy a new pump. And at the same time, you're going to actually have to go shock your well on a regular basis." "But why is that?" she said. And I said, "Because your well was drilled at probably, in many cases, a lot of our wells were at 100, 150 feet. In some cases, this one's 60 feet. But that's when there was plenty of water back in the 80s. When you're in a drought system, a stress system, your wells are starting to fail. So our wells are working a lot harder to get water up when we're in a situation where your static level is low. And again, it could take 2 to 3 years for our wells to actually recharge. So pointing fingers at industry isn't really what the conversation is. It's actually, does that come out again? Yeah. Oh, that's the new, the Working Well Workshop. Well, on October 22nd from 6:30 to 8, I am like serendipity.
Amy Nanick sent it to me.
See, look at that. This is new.
Policy writer.
Yeah, for sure. So the Working Well program is out right now, and definitely you'll be able to share that with folks. So that's the first thing. I think that we need to take care of it. The one thing, the difference between myself and people that live in the city is, first of all, they can skip the dishes. And if I skip the dishes, my wife will yell at me because I didn't clean them. And the second thing is, I know my septic system really, really well. And super well. I've been there, I know it, I don't want to talk about it. But that's not something that the city folks have been involved in. So we have, again, this stress system. And one thing I'm going to talk about the Paskapoo Formation, because just some interesting data came across my desk the other day. And so everybody treats the Paskapoo Formation as this big bathtub. It is not a big bathtub. It is not this big, huge, we don't have straws poking into a bathtub. It is undulating underground, and it has different qualities, and some are pockets that aren't contained, and there's no interaction between one and another. So you cannot base assumptions on the Paskapoo Formation by just one well. And I think your program of doing multiple well monitoring is important, because we have wells that actually have fluoride exceedances that are in line of sight of a well that has no fluoride exceedances. So this system is now, what's happening is the water is getting so low in this stress system, and you get a concentration of minerals and pollutants, and you're starting to get a situation where people's groundwater quality is actually being stressed. Has nothing to do with oil and gas. Has to do with being in a drought. And so We need to start having these conversations about how the system works, having an understanding how it works. I know you folks have heard this before. If any of you folks are into hydrology or hydrogeology, I worked with Udo Weir. Udo Weir had multiple PhDs. Some of you folks have heard this. I worked with this guy. If you were into hydrogeology and hydrology and you knew that I worked with this guy, you'd be going, oh my God, he wrote textbooks on this stuff. And I worked with him up in Tucker Lake, up in Cold Lake. And he was in a hearing. And the lawyer said, how do you know? And he says, I'm Udo Weir, I have 4 PhDs, I wrote the textbook, I've been doing this forever. He's got a thick German accent. And I was going to use it, but then I think that's racist now. I'm not sure if you're allowed to do that. Plus, you know what? I was in Germany this summer, and I was using that accent, and that was not funny to them. I thought it'd be hilarious. They did not like that. And when Germans don't like you, you find out really quickly. And so he says, this is my resume. I know this stuff. I'm the guy, and I do not know. I do not know because I have a limited amount of data to make my decisions. This is my best educated guess. And that's an important thing to understand as it relates to water, and especially groundwater. We do not know. Groundwater can flow uphill. I've seen it, I've experienced it. And it's important to understand this. You folks have a lot going on in Medicine River, this watershed. And I'm glad that Medicine River is connected to the Blind Man, because you folks have the same situation. You guys are dealing with the same type of, you're a perch basin. You're actually dealing with just surface flows. You're not dealing with snowpack flows. So you're really in the same situation. There's a lot going on. And I think that the opportunity to actually work together and solve problems, I think, is important. So I'm going to move into what needs to happen. So I'm going to get into the action part. And this is hour 1 of a 4 hours, so I'm not going to take any breaks. You guys are going to work through this. But there's a few issues that are going on. And so the Medicine River, so back in the day, there was a concept called in-stream flow needs. Now it's actually changed into conservation goals and conservation flows. There's not an understanding of what the base level of water that's required for the medicine. It's actually extrapolated from flow data, and it's not really based upon the system. You folks know what these rivers are like. You go from one side to the other, they change. You could have a little pond, a deep spot somewhere. As you said, it's a moving lake in many ways. We need to have a better understanding what the base needs of these lakes, these rivers, because it is not known. So typically when I'm looking at flow data in other systems other than this one, that in-stream flow needs, that base level, is actually part of the water, because in southern Alberta that becomes the base. No matter what, they shall not go below that. And that's what sustains life. That's what sustains fish. That allows fish to carry over for winter. That allows you to actually have that base load to have trees in a river. And that does not exist. It's actually extrapolated and it's modeled. And this needs to be tested in real case. So there's really a need for that. Those in-stream objectives need to be identified. And I think that one of the things, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, is gauging stations. The fact that you're making conclusions based on one gauging station, one way you're measuring it, that's a ridiculous way to take care of any, especially, like I said, the demand is increasing on the system and you're using one station.
And so there's a beaver dam right there.
If there's a beaver dam right there, the Blind Man beaver dam. So I talked to the Canadian government manages the hydrometric station. They're actually experts in, because you need to actually survey it to put those systems in that measure the water. And they actually said that the system is actually shrinking in Alberta. They're not increasing it. They're becoming more expensive to run, and the province is actually looking at contracting the system. And so one of my action items, I think, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but there really needs to be monitoring at the community level. And I think there's an opportunity to do that, especially when you get this play-based system or a play-based situation where you got this concentrated use in areas like this. Every tributary, as much as you can measure things, you need to understand what's going on in the system and actually make conclusions based upon the system, especially if you're withdrawing surface water. Green-gray infrastructure is an important conversation, because we need to start talking about how to maintain that spring freshet. I like people in Saskatchewan, other than the fact that they water watermelons on their head in football games is weird to me. But we're letting a lot of water flow into Saskatchewan that we should probably hold back. And I'm not necessarily talking fully about putting large dams in place, but we need to recognize that beavers and beaver analogs and wetlands are one way for us to hold a lot of water back. If we are not having the snow that we've had in the good old days, and I tell stories to my kids that I remember when, and they haven't seen those winters, the reality is that we need to collect as much as we can. We need to start looking at it from a landscape standpoint. We need to be looking at it from an agricultural standpoint. We need to start having that conversation. I've been involved with a few projects on beaver analogs. So basically, you're building a beaver dam without a beaver involved. And so it's important to understand that those systems actually could hold a lot of water in the system because, again, if we're not getting the rain when you want it, this is where we got to start running into the situations we're in right now. There's not enough water in the system right now to properly winter for trees, for example. So we're dealing with some situations here that, you know what, we're going to have to learn to get around it. We're going to have to be adapted to it. We're going to have to start to recognize it. There needs to be some legislative reform. And I think that, and I will share this with everybody too, they can circulate this, but really there needs to be some collaboration between industry, individuals. We need to have this conversation. It is not, I believe we all need to have some sort of oversight. And I do not believe that the AR should act without oversight. I need oversight, that's why I'm married. Basically, that's what's holding my marriage together, is her supremacy over me, and she keeps me in check. I know someone's going to tell her that I said that out loud. And so there needs to be regular evaluations and audits of the system. We need to have oversight. There is a lot of reporting that isn't occurring. There's a lot of actions that are occurring. And I think that we need to have a better understanding. The connection between policy and this system is important. And a few of the licenses that have been issued lately have been issued by AI, was their matrix, the decision matrix. And I'll show you where there's a problem with that. And we need to actually start looking at potentially a different structure for water fees and reservoirs. We need to start putting, and everybody gets upset when you start putting a value on water, but we need to value water. So that doesn't mean buy water, but we need to value water. Water has to have some sort of value in our system, and we need to start having these conversations because, trust me, the people in the South, they got it figured out because they've been dealing with this for a long time. We're just getting used to it. And it's going to be a tough haul because I've been experiencing it for 30 years in southern Alberta. Now, there is any opportunities for wetland restoration. I think there's some opportunities, beaver analogs I talked about. Definitely there's a phosphorus issue in the medicine that is a big discussion. I think there needs to be some discussion around water quality. Riparian health assessments, I can go on for hours about that, but there's really an opportunity for these watersheds to work with student groups and school groups and get out there and actually do some community-based monitoring, because what we need to be is involved. We need to all have ownership in this watershed, because if you believe someone in Edmonton is taking care of this watershed, you're wrong. They are not doing that. They got other stuff, and they may not even know where you are. And that's a stark reality. They maybe never been there. They don't know where beautiful Hespero is. And I do, now. And so, you know, it's important to understand too that I think there's some bigger calls to action that I think that really we need to ensure that licenses that are being supported by key decisions, they're supported in policy. And I don't want to get to be like a super policy wonk, but we got to make sure that we're having these clear use and this clear feedback. And why are you doing it? And this public witnessing, some transparency. What alternatives were placed? What choices were made? What decisions? What was the decision out loud? We need to have that out loud, not hidden in one stop where someone's pressing a button or AI saying this is okay. And really, there's really no, and some of this actually came out of the Auditor General's report, which they're actually quite scathing, that there's really not a lot of monitoring on licenses. And I think that, and this is a situation where I think oil and gas could probably say there's enough monitoring on licenses for oil and gas. There's other parts of the system that there is no monitoring and reporting. There is zero. And I think that we need to ensure that we're reporting to see what the system really has in place. And definitely let your MLAs know that the current guidelines, the current regulations are not serving what this current oil and gas activity is. It is not working. It is not working at all. These are industrial activities, an industrial activity in a rural community. It's a very complex conversation. It's 24/7. It's 500 vehicles a day. It's snakes of anacondas. It's a good people. Like, never would I have believed I'd move to where I live on my little cow pasture, and within 2 kilometers, all the wastewater from Eckville would be in my community. Because it was. It's probably a good thing. I don't think I could ever look at the mayor the same again, but the reality is that wastewater came in our community used for frack, and that's a good thing. I think that's a positive thing, and we need to start talking about some of the positive things out there. We need to support industry. We also need to talk about good neighbor policy. I don't want to bury the good neighbor policy, but the conversation around viable alternatives is how I want to finish this conversation. really making sure that viable alternatives are part of the decision making, I think, is important. And we do have some examples of the Haynes Formation, and we can definitely get an opportunity for Spartan to talk about what they're doing in that situation. But the conversation around alternatives needs to be the conversation for all decisions being made. And I'll show you why, because it's actually under the water conservation guidelines. But making the approving authority for the TDLs the same for different, we need to actually have that oversight on the overall holistic policy. Because that's where we're going to start having conflicts. When you start having agriculture fighting with oil and gas, something is wrong with the system. When they start blaming each other instead of actually working together, you got a problem with the system too as well. And the one thing too is I think there's some opportunities here, work from a municipal perspective, is that actually there's some opportunities, and AOPA learned a lot from this actually through the ERCB. Is actually looking for municipalities and working with them on good neighbor, on dust control, on roads, because again, 500 vehicles a day. In one day, it would take me probably about 30 years to do the activities on my side road that a frac has. And our infrastructure isn't necessarily built for that, so there's ways to improve that. And in many cases, industry's really basically stepped up and actually taken that as a call to action to address those issues. But again, the AR and the regulations aren't matching that. And in my 30 years, this is the most important thing, and industry needs to understand this. Anybody that's a scientist needs to understand this. Perception is reality. And I'm on the Environmental Appeals Board. And when I'm on the Environmental Appeals Board, I have subject matter experts come before the Environmental Appeals Board, and I constantly have to give them a bit of coaching, saying perception is reality. And you need to listen first to understand before you tell people how it works. Because at the same time, I've worked with enough people that have been wrong. I worked up in the Cold Lake area, and I remember one of the oil and gas companies up there said people were concerned, and they said, if you're pulling all the oil out of the ground, won't the ground collapse? They said, no, the ground is a sponge, the oil comes out of the sponge. If you bring out a sponge, it won't collapse. And I heard that for years, and this was a conversation with the community. When the oil and gas company came back to the community, and an area about half the size of Legislative County dropped 3 centimeters, that they found out using LiDAR, laser radar, and said, yes, it all did shrink 3 centimeters. They had to actually apologize to the community for being wrong. So never assume you're right. And I think it's important for industry, it's important for regulators. I hear that a lot. I hear the dialogue from folks that represent government, that really they need to listen first to understand what the issues are. You folks know what it's like where you live. You use references of people's names to places. That doesn't occur in the cities. And at the same time, you understand your system and your community much better. So here's the thing, and this is, again, I've added to this. Hopefully it gets better every time. One day this will be perfect. It'll be in 10 years. But there's a water conservation policy for upstream oil and gas operations. So this is actually referred to in a lot of the approvals we've seen lately. And so I love this, the hierarchy pyramid. So the question is, in most situations, is you're supposed to look at, non-saline solutions, and that's the least efficient. It's the most efficient, but it's the least desired, and recycling is positive. And so at every time, this is required to look at. Every single decision needs to look at these alternatives, especially if you look at the little map to the left, which again is referred to in the water conservation policy for upstream oil and gas. All that yellow area is where we live, folks. We are actually in a potentially water short area. So the bar is raised in the area that we're in right now. So, but it's important to understand that these guidelines, they exist. And again, this is where I'm blaming the regulator. I'm not blaming oil and gas, so they exist. The industry created this. They said, we need to be governed by this. This is what we need to do. And companies like Spartan Delta and Baytex are going above and beyond. But this was required in the first place. And here's an interesting line. In the circumstances where no feasible alternative exists, then they'll wait till one is created. And what's really happened is I've heard something that I find extremely frightening from the AER. And I will publicly tell everybody this because they said this to me in public. We need to recognize that some of these might be expensive to industry, and therefore we need to create the least cost solution. Now, I have a problem with that. So and I told Minister Jean this, said, so I'll give you an example. So I'm speeding, which I did speed here a little bit. I will apologize. And lucky the Legislative County folks, any other peace officers were probably at Tim Hortons because they didn't get me this time. But if they pulled me over and said, you were speeding, I'm going to give you a ticket, and they're going to say, well, how much money you got in your wallet? I'm like, I don't have any. They're like, you know what? Go about your day. No worries. Don't worry about it. Since when did the law and the regulations require a measure of the cost of implementing them? There's a problem with the system if that's what the discussion is, because people within the AR have said this to me, that we need to have the least cost solution. That's actually in contravention of the water conservation guidelines that were created by the industry. And so why are we here today? It's not because the laws don't exist. We actually don't need to create new rules. We need to make sure the rules are being enforced. And I will say, the industry folks have heard people, and I'm hearing more, and we're seeing this being encouraging, but this is a big problem. And when you have a regulator doing this, and I've said this because I did have a job as the president of the Rural Municipalities Alberta, and I had 400 of my best friends grab pom-poms. I bought 400 pom-poms. You know how hard it is to buy 400 pom-poms? It's not as easy as you think. But I got 400 pom-poms. And I had the minister, the energy minister at the time, had him come up and speak. And I had all of them shake the pom-poms, and I told them to stop. And I said the AR should not be a cheerleader for the industry. They need to be a regulator in the public interest. And that's really the conversation that we need to have. That shift needs to come back to us. I'm watching myself, but so I do want to give two solutions here, and then I'll open it up for questions too as well. So there is a need for in-stream flow objectives for this area. I think the directors need to guide the water allocation decisions. I think these type of groups can really drive that system. These WCOs definitely need to be done, and I think that there's some opportunity with some of the work that's being done to incorporate those. The ultimate solution, so what are the things that can actually occur? Alternate sources of water. And again, the Haynes Formation, if we can encourage that, if we can make water a non-strategic part of oil and gas, but actually have companies have to work together collectively, there's opportunities in that situation too as well.
The brackish water.
Brackish water. And you know what? Unintended consequences. Let's have a brackish water discussion. The worst contamination I ever dealt with was, the second worst was salt. And the first one was a dry cleaning place. Don't use dry cleaning places, people. That tetrachloroethylene, that's horrible stuff. But salt is a horrible contamination. Actually, salt is a worse contamination than oil and gas, folks. So you need to have a discussion around that. There's options there too as well. There needs to be flow monitoring. We all need to have some oversight. We need to have better understanding, and that real-time water well monitoring is occurring too as well. Now, I know you guys know about the Sonotec IQ series. Most of you are huge fans of the Sonotec IQ series. Probably one of the better flow monitor systems. Not the one I always would go to, but it's the one that's fairly cost effective. So the reason why I bring this up is there is solutions. And what I'm hoping to do over the winter here is get my colleagues together from municipalities and start to talk about some oversight to increase the monitoring in the system. And using things like this technology is a great way to provide information that I think we all need to look at. And this is one of many different technologies. My wife just quoted this to a community group that's actually doing their own, running their own hydrometric station. So they're monitoring their own data. And that creates some ownership. Because again, in order to create trust, you need to make sure someone's got your back. And I've yet to hear a conversation, a speech from anybody that actually I was really 100% convinced they have our back. And the only people so far that I think has our back are the watershed societies, both Blyman and Medicine River. And I think, seriously. And so I think empowering folks like that, empowering them with the ability to have this information, I think would make it be a great step forward. And I'm a huge fan of the Sonotec, and they're $19,000. And I looked at cheaper ones, but they were sort of offshore, and I don't know if I trust them. But the conversation is that reality is probably about 2 or 3 systems in place that can be moved around where there's draws, and actually having a better monitoring, both in the blind man and medicine, I think they provide quite a bit of oversight. And I do know, definitely in my history of being a professional biologist in the field. So for safety, I put on a blaze and I go out and I'll do biological studies. But sometimes I do audits, and I'll do an audit of a site like a gravel pit or an oil gas facility. And there's 2 ways to do it. You show up and surprise them, Or you do what I do, is I call them ahead of time and tell them I'm showing up. And you know what? If they know I'm coming, that is the cleanest facility you've ever been at. It's just like mom and dad's coming home from a long holiday. And I think that oversight, knowing you're being watched, knowing you're being audited, I think is an important part to improve some behavior. And I think that's for all of us too as well. So I do thank for the opportunity to speak today. This is hour one. We can take a break. But the one thing I will say is this government has committed to doubling production. And probably the only real political thing I'll say, other than I have been slamming the AR and it's on video, they're going to sue my ass. And I'm going to do a crowdsource, potentially, for a legal support if I do get sued.
Should we lock the doors? Nobody gets out?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you see a crowdsource where I need funding to get me out of jail, if you're going to double production, which I think is a laudable goal, at what cost? And you need to have a conversation that it should occur. We should have more production. At the same time, we got to make sure we're having that public discussion around what choices are being made. Because you know where this is being produced? It's not being produced in downtown Calgary. It's not being produced on the legislative grounds. I do not believe there's an oil and gas facility on the grounds yet. It's being produced in rural Alberta. And the folks that have to live with this are us. And the decisions being made on behalf of us aren't us. And when I get egg-splained by someone who lives in the city on what it's like, and any belief that I have so much land, how could it bother me? You got to give me a break. Because if I spudded any of this stuff in your community, you guys would start on fire. They would lose their mind. And I think the reality is that where I live in Ponoka County, everybody that I represent is 1 degree from oil and gas. We all are. We work in the industry. It feeds us. It clothes us. They're an important partner. And I think the message we need to send is to the AR, ultimately, and the regulators. And you know what? Let's empower Alberta Environment to do what they should do, because they should actually manage the water on behalf of all of us. So I'll take questions.
Good. Paul, I do have something.
Yes.
I had invited the town of Sylvan Lake here. And I
Yes.
invited them because of the aquifer. They
Yes.
have a shortage of water in the town. And I'm wondering if you could go back to your slide where you showed the static water levels of a couple of wells
Yes.
in the Leedale area. You
Yeah.
kind of, could you touch on those a little bit more, what that's saying?
Yeah, and this is where the really big discussion. So we're all in the Paskapoo Formation where most of us get our water. And so
Paskapoo goes to Red Deer?
yeah, I have like the whole, actually I had it buried in here and I probably didn't. So there's the Paskapoo, see that? So it goes all the way down to Calgary. And I'll tell you, you don't want to drink the water around here. Like, know it personally. It's got some. Do you remember Aaron Bronkovich or whatever, where they had contaminated water? Don't drink water outside of Calgary. So this extends quite far. So this is the problem: is that there is connectivity and then there isn't, and there's little microbasins within microbasins, and there's undulations under the ground. But it's a stressed system. And so pulling water out of one system, you're not sure if it takes five years to go somewhere else, 50 years, 100 years. Some of the water you folks might poke into might be 100,000 years old or maybe a few weeks old. That's the problem. There's ways for us to find this out. It requires money and it requires a will. But I do think that understanding how the groundwater system works, I think that Sylvan Lake's got a good understanding, probably a better understanding than most places. But at the same time, you have a stress system in Sylvan Lake. You're not sure how far it goes, and I've looked at your studies in depth, and it goes pretty far, what the speculation is. And so we need more data to make decisions, and understanding how this works is important. But I think that the reality is that this Haines Formation is below the Paskapoo, and we need to protect the Paskapoo Formation as rural Albertans. We are relying, the reason why we exist where we exist is because of our well system. And our well system is getting stressed. So it is definitely the water well management for well owners. Definitely highly recommend it. You need to take care of yourself. It's really important. And if you have not shocked your well or changed your well or looked at your well in a while, definitely you need to do that.
Well, in the next slide, I think you have
Yes.
static water level.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so when you drill your well, they've got the bottom hole. So the bottom hole depth is like 79 feet. Can you guys see that? I don't have a pointer or anything. I need a stick. Anyway, 79 feet. So when they drill the hole, the bottom is 79 feet. So then it fills full of water, and then they check your static water level, and that's where the water has filled the column through the perforate, and that's your static level. And what's happened to all of you, I'll guarantee you probably don't look at your well every day. Well, you should go look at your well after you look at One Stop, the AER system for finding out what's going on in your community. But we're not looking at it. But what's happened is, what I'm seeing all the time is those are way below. So in that case, that was 66 feet. So the water was 66 feet, and now it's 109. It's actually near the bottom of the bottom hole. Like that's a 150-foot bottom hole.
And that's in the Leadale area, right?
That's correct, yeah.
So that, those wells being low in the Pascapoo, it could affect everyone in the Pascapoo. This is where we just don't know.
Or no.
Or no.
Or yes, or no. Probably not, but I don't know.
Right.
Like I don't know. But at the same time, if you're stressed in the Leadale area, Hespero, which is a beautiful place, I really highly recommend it. I really recommend Hespero. I can't stop talking about Hespero. I don't know why.
It's in Macomb County.
Well, they're the same boat. So then you go from there, so you go from Leadale to Hespero, then you go to Sylvan Lake, and how are things in Sylvan Lake? Well, you're campaigning right now, but they're awesome, right? The taxes are so low. But how are your wells? You got lots of water? Is everybody showering every day? Megan? See, you're good. So the Ponoka Stampede, which by the way is the best stampede in the world, I had Premier Smith speaking at the Ponoka Stampede. When did Calgary have no water? 2 years ago? 2 years ago? 3 years ago? Yeah. She did not think it's funny when I said, have you showered recently because you were in Calgary? And I told Mayor Gondek that, so I had Mayor Gondek there. She was the mayor of Calgary. And so I was talking to her and I said, you know what's cool about Ponoka County? And I said, what's that? I said, I shower all I want. I can take 2 or 3 showers a day. Calgary, you can't. But so it's really monitoring the system and measuring is critical. And I think your conversation around monitoring. And here's the problem with wells. And here's the problem with measuring. And this is an important conversation. And I spend a tremendous amount of my time trying to teach the people the difference between causation and correlation. 2 very different things. And my life is built around this. This is what I do for a living. Causation is really hard to prove. It is so hard. For you to be doing something and for me to tell you that's who did it. And correlation seems to be easy for people. It's got to be that guy. That's the only reason why that happened. And so making those connections, connecting those dots is very difficult. But the solution to determining the difference between causation and correlation is data and information. And whether that's water quality data, and industry does this well, where they'll do looking at water quality prior to development and after development, and making sure that you understand. But the reality is, if you do not have that data, drawing a conclusion on causation is extremely difficult. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of the activities going on in this area, I'll guarantee you, they are not the causation of what's going on. Drought's the causation of what's going on. Yeah. Correlation is what people are assuming, but causation isn't it. Yes, sir?
Funny you say that, because the Hunter race dug that pond on Highway 53, and I had an artesian well. You talk about causations. Well, that was a direct cause of why my artesian quit. And
I think you're probably correct. So you made a connection for causation. So, and actually, I'll teach you about that dugout. So 150 feet bottom hole. So in this, let's use this well. 66 feet is static water level, so that's where the groundwater is, folks. 66 feet. You dig a hole, like a big hole that's 65 feet down, you actually have an interface between surface water and groundwater. That's in violation of the Water Act, in violation of the water policy. So that is a situation where Alberta Environment actually should get involved, because you have an interface, and you cannot have an interface between surface water and groundwater. And that does exactly what that situation is. So you're right, that would be probably causation. Yes, sir.
So going to what Terry was saying years ago, I did work up in Fort St. John area, Pink Mountain area. And oil companies at the time would build huge C rings, and they would take the water that they used from one frac, they would build a pipeline, 2 pipelines actually, one for the natural gas, one for water. And they'd use that water over and over and over again, rather than taking it to disposal wells. So maybe we need to do what happened in the 1980s when the Don Giddy government told the oil and gas industry, because things were the Wild West, and they said, you either start policing yourselves, or we're going to bring in a bunch of regulations where we're going to police you like you wouldn't believe. So they came out and they developed a bunch of industry recommended practices at the time. Maybe we need to have that conversation again, say, you need to start policing yourselves, otherwise there could be someone who's going to come out with a citizen referendum Act proponent saying no more fresh water for fracking, and then that shuts down the entire industry.
Yeah.
So they need to maybe be aware that this frustration is there. They need to take action immediately before they lose the right to fresh water.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. And I think that creating that closed recycling loop system, I think that's the conversation. We need to promote that and support industry in doing that and push that for sure. So yeah, that's an excellent point for sure. So Hesbro,
No,
you're not from Hesbro.
No,
You
I'm
love Hesbro as much as I do.
I don't know, I'm not from Hesbro, I'm from up northwest of Lesterville.
Oh, those people.
Yeah, those
Oh,
hill people.
okay, okay, we're good, we're good. I didn't know if it was bad or good.
Anyway, can you speak to the mature asset strategy and how it's related to the AER?
So we're going to have to, Helgi wants us to use the microphone for people asking.
Oh, of course, yes.
Recording. So
Yeah.
can you ask that again?
I can try it.
Would you speak to the mature asset strategy that is being pushed or promoted by the AER and how it will affect the water use or how it affects the oil and gas industry,
For sure.
the
That's,
landowner?
yeah, and we could bury this whole meeting in mature asset strategy, and it actually should be called the marginal asset strategy. I don't like the word mature. As someone who's over 50 now, I feel I'm mature. I'm not marginal. And I think using mature assets is the wrong word. So the conversation related to the marginal asset strategy is being driven to deal with these dry wells. And so we're dealing with a situation where there is definitely a water interface with those, but ultimately it's looking at repurposing, it's looking at decreasing some reclamation requirements. Is it tied to water? Maybe at a future date. I have some concerns over it where the AER is spending a lot of energy on the marginal asset strategy where they're not dealing with ongoing grievances for orphan wells and reclamation cleanup and those kind of things. So I think there's probably some things need to occur in that situation. As it relates to water in the watershed, probably not. Definitely educate yourself. I think it's important. It's important for it to go forward successfully, but it's also important for all the grievances of landowners and those to be addressed too as well.
Well, and I'm thinking how what I've heard, they're proposing to download a lot of the costs onto the taxpayer.
There is an idea that has yet to be totally part of any public document, but where would the money come from? And the conversation would be, would there be tax credits or other pieces that would occur? And I've always held by the polluter pay concept. That's how I raise my kids. You clean up your own mess, I won't clean them up. And my wife has raised me the same. So I have to clean up my own messes as well. And so nobody wants to clean up their messes. Ponoka County 100% supports oil and gas. None of them want to pay their taxes, and none of them want to pay to clean up after them. And that needs to be a message that comes from all of us. So, yes.
Thanks, Paul, for the excellent presentation. You said that the AER requires oversight. And you and I were both in a meeting 2 weeks ago where David Yeager spoke. And at this point, he is in the placeholder of oversight on AER, but his shirt represents gas and oil for sure. And so how do we take back oversight for the AER?
Yeah, and so the messages that I'm hearing from government, which I think are important, is, and when I say government, like definitely the ministry, is actually shrinking the responsibility of the AER as opposed to increasing it, because everything we're talking about should be their responsibility. I'll give you the best example is weeds on well sites. This is my favorite topic, because this is how things are so broken. So you can have weeds on a well site, and a company can go bankrupt. So it becomes part of the Orphan Well Association. So the Orphan Well Association has no responsibility for weeds on well sites. Well, I'm going to go spray it. You cannot trespass on those sites to spray those weeds on well sites. What? So the AER is responsible. We are not responsible under the Weed Act for weeds on well sites. Okay, well, I'm going to go spray it. You cannot trespass on oil and gas sites that have weeds on it. That's how broken the system is. And so I think what I've learned through my discussions is that do not rely on the AER because they're having a tough time doing what they're supposed to do anyways. So the reality is that we need to find somebody that can get it done and give them the job. So that's the reality. So I have another question?
There's one piece that's missing from the whole presentation. The AER only exists at the behest of the provincial government. The AER was created by an act of the legislature in 2013 with amendments in 2014. The Responsible Energy Development Act created the AER as a private corporation. This is a majority government. They could introduce an act when they open the legislature in 10 days that would change, cancel, remove the AER. They don't exist without this legislature's act. And that's missing from all of this discussion, and that is a solution to the problem. They do not exist on their own. They're created as a private corporation. UCP is a majority. They can pass that in one stop, 24 hours.
So, and Terry, so back in the day when you were with the ERCB, right? Shows you how old I am. I remember working under ERCB laws. So when the ERCB existed, so that's before the AER broke into the AER and the AUC, they actually had public interest in their mandate. The ERCB did. So everything you did was in the public interest test. Those do not exist under the AUC and under the AER's mandate. Public interest is not a discussion point that's driven by their responsibility. So, which is a fascinating change. Someone probably forgot to put it in. But when you fill the beautiful Gilby Hall, by not having a public interest test, that's probably how this happens, right? I'm guessing. I don't know. I mean, Gilby Hall's awesome. Don't get me wrong. And the pizza was good. Any other questions? No one over here?
Hi, Paul. Thanks. I was wondering if you could clear something up for me. When I see these pipes moving water from one point to another, and I hear that it's being used for fracking, my perception of this process is that surface water is taken out of the water cycle and it's pumped into the ground and it's gone. Now, if that's true, what do the oil companies pay for that water? Are they paying anything for that water? And if not, why not?
Yeah, and that's sort of the value of water conversation. And so there is a conversation. People sell access to water, but people don't sell water, so they're selling access to water. And so, but it is not entirely consumed, and undeniably there is a consumption of it. Anywhere between 20 and 30% is consumed. It is removed from the water cycle. And I'll play both sides. I'll play devil's advocate here as well. Some of the water wasn't in the system. The Haines hasn't been in the system probably, I don't know. Is any of you guys a hydrogeologist? How old is the Haines water? Do you guys know? 80,000?
What, sorry?
How old is the Haines water?
Oh, I'm not. 1,000 years?
1,000 years. Like, so the water in the Haines is like 1,000 years. It hasn't been up for 1,000 years. You know, not that dinosaurs were dancing it, but probably the mastodon was dancing it. And but one of the conversations that occurs is that, and I've had this conversation, I've spent 30 years in water policy. So perfect example, do we sell water? No. Like, we don't sell water. Oh, we do though, it's in the shape of a cow. When we sell a cow to the US, that's water, and that's actually a lot of water. There's a lot of water in a cow. So we've been selling water to the States for a long time, and we've been buying their water too. So this big water discussion, this is going to become a conversation, and this is how I have conversations, and this is why you need to become involved, is that we don't have the institutional strength right now to deal with water scarcity. We need to come together and work together on it. We need to make sure we have industry and oil and gas and communities grow. And we need to build that infrastructure in order to take it on. We did not deal with a pandemic very well. I don't know if you remember that. I'm trying to forget that frickin' thing. But we need to have that institutional strength to deal with this. Because if there's another 10 years of this, people's wells will be gone. And that's a big discussion. And when we start fighting over the Haines formation, I don't know what we're going to do, because I can't afford that well, because that one cost you guys a little bit, right? Like, you think anybody's going to do that? No one's paying X amount of dollars, millions of dollars to poke into the Haines. So I can't afford that. Not on the low taxes that we got in Ponoka County, and county councilors in Ponoka County barely get paid anything. Not like in Lacombe County. We don't have those gold-plated. Any other questions? Yes?
Hey, Paul. I totally agree with your comments on the causation and correlation, and the big concern I have is that, like oil and gas, they're not the cause of the drought. The drought is the cause of the drought. And unfortunately, it was bad circumstances that this huge increase in demand in water in our area, it's a very specific geographic area, has coincided with a long-term drought that we're in. And so there's a water scarcity. We wouldn't be having this conversation if we were having 18 to 22 inches of precipitation a year, which we haven't been. And anybody in agriculture or that's been living in the rural area knows that there is an issue. And the big concern I have, and you can maybe talk about the Environment Minister's new mandate letter on increasing water availability. But if we're looking at using groundwater, which is connected to surface water, and we have no idea what the recharge times are, even if we're using it now because they say it's available, there's a lot of water down there, we don't know what the recharge time on that is, and if we don't have increased precipitation in the future, we're just mining the water that we should be actually saving for our own living conditions, 20 years down the road.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. So these big public policy discussions are important, is that Pascapoo formation is our piggy bank. Like, that is good. That is what's preserving life in a drought like this. And when you start doing using groundwater for stock watering and significant groundwater for stock watering, that's a big discussion when we start seeing wells depleting over time. And so, and I think having more water available, one of the things I will, I'm not in a position to speak on behalf of the minister, but there's definitely inefficiencies in the system. And the fact is, and I don't recommend doing this, but I do travel internationally quite a bit. I was in the Middle East last year. I was in Germany. Again, don't use a German accent there. They don't think that's funny. The Swiss don't like it either. So don't do it to the Swiss either. But I was in Jordan, and I look to American, very weird place to be if you look like an American. But the water in the back of my toilet is better than a lot of the water I saw there. And the fact is that we actually have gray water that's not allowed to go into the system, and we have these laws that we can have recycled gray water, which is what's happening. And I will commend industry that they're using this water and bringing it back and providing some usability. But we need to really have some improvement, and I think that there's inefficiencies in the system, there's leaky systems. We need to be a lot more effective with the water. You know what, we were spoiled, folks. Talk about history, Palliser expedition. He came here, he was British, he came to southern Alberta, and he goes, this is a wasteland, no one's gonna live here. And he left, and it rained like crazy after that. And we all moved in. And all that's happening is it's getting pretty close to the way it was when Palliser was here, that this was a frickin' desert. And this was a tough place to live. And we kind of were in a bit of a wet period here. We all moved in, we kind of got robbed a little bit. So it's important to understand that really there is some things that can be done. And I think that the best thing to be done is educate yourself, share information, and work with industry, and you know what, be political, folks. You know what? MLA's got nothing to do, right, Jennifer? Like, fill her email box. Call her. You work on Saturday, Sunday. Like, call her anytime, and she'll leave her phone number up here. So you can any concerns. Yep. She'll actually come help with your septic system. That's the thing MLAs do now. So thank you for that. Any other questions?
Yeah, you bet. Right here.
Whoa! I was trying to track that. It was coming from over there.
To our watershed and our rivers, of course, and the taxation of this system has been going on a very long time. And I'll go back as far as when the place used to still be called Hobima. Okay, it's called Musquechish now. Now the Red Deer system, the Red Deer water system, taxing the Red Deer River, was all tied into Black Falls, Lacombe, and Ponoka, all the way to Musquechish. This was done years ago. Now, things have happened in there, and I've learned this. Certain things happened in order for that to happen. Like, for instance, Ponoka was forced to cement off and abandon 17 water wells. Now, those kind of things need to be transparent, and we need to stop that kind of crap. all I'm saying, and thanks for letting me speak.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Yeah, and there's a lot of, I had an old well on my place. Has anybody got like an old well in their place that was hand dug? You should probably fill that in. It takes way more bentonite than you think, too. I bought like 4 bags of bentonite. My wife's laughing at me because she's actually like a groundwater tech, and she didn't say anything to me. So I'm like, I'm gonna seal off that well. So I'm dumping bentonite in there, and I'm like, it didn't fill up yet. She goes, you're an idiot. You buy it by a pallet, you clown. So I had to go to town, and I was proud of myself. I thought it was a well finisher. Yes, sir.
Hey, Paul, thanks for the presentation. It was wonderful. But I'd just like to implore everyone in this room to talk to not only their neighbors, but people in towns, villages, and the city. Because honest to goodness, there is a significant disconnect between understanding where their water comes from other than the tap and how crucial our watershed and our rivers are. That's just my comment. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And I think it's amazing how many people, like how many small towns are working off of water wells and that are aging out. A lot of people don't know, and you're right. A lot of people flush the toilet, don't know where it goes either, so. We should take them on a trip there. Have you ever gone to the lagoon yet? How come nobody does that in school, eh? Let's go to the lagoon, kids. Let's go on the wastewater school trip. Yes, sir.
Hey, so the Otterite Pond, that was approved by the County of Ponoka?
Nope.
Was it not?
No, we don't have jurisdiction over, we approved it as a agricultural and quickly determined it wasn't agriculture, and then that got moved to a different decision-making model.
So my question, if you could go to page 7.
Yep.
On there. And there were several points discussing the
Yeah.
locals of Ponoka County.
Yeah.
And just the third one is the county will work with industry to ensure that non-renewable resources, oil, gas, coal, gravel, etc., are protected against development which might make extraction more difficult or dangerous or expensive. And to me, that is hypocritical from the next one, which Ponoka County acknowledges the right of the owner of real property to use and enjoyment of said property and the right not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the law. When you live next door and your artesian well dries up.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then it becomes a conversation of what jurisdiction do we have, and you're right. And so again, I've stuck to my lane, but I advocate outside my lane. And so this is a tough job. This is why this is a hard job, is that balancing act, is maintaining industrial development, maintaining agriculture, and at the same time trying to make sure people's peace and enjoyment. And artesian wells drying up, really that should be a criminal act, to be quite honest. And because that's really pulling away someone's livelihood and causing pretty negligent impact. And actually you probably could easily take a civil case for someone taking out your artesian well. I think there's grounds to be said about that. So yeah, that's the tricky part. That's why I'm up here today too. That's why this dance is hard, right? It's hard, and I'm not trying to play both sides, and I think that hopefully you're hearing that I'm not playing both sides. I think that we got to do better, and that's really the point of my conversation, is don't believe that someone's taking care of this. We got to do better, and don't give up. Don't think you're done, because I don't think you are. And when you look at probably a $1.8 billion investment in this region, you think my horse were scared of the anacondas before. They're going to be tripping over snakes at the end of the next year. So no, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
That would have been a good question during a forum if someone ran against me. That'd be a perfect question.
Okay, we've got Alan Wilson here, who's the counselor for Division 6 in Macomb County, has a question. I didn't introduce him earlier. My apologies.
No worries. Paul, what are your thoughts on using the Haynes for supplementing oil and gas, filling Gull Lake? It's been, that balloon's been floated to take care of that problem too. But isn't it kind of the holy grail, like our last big water resource? Like, what are your thoughts on the Haynes?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those conversations where the hierarchy of what alternatives are being used, and I think that if we can go back to that pyramid, saying, are you using all alternative sources? And then you're looking for new sources. And you're right, in the long game, but the Haynes, and I won't ask Spartan Delta to tell me what the water quality is, I've had some experience in the area. Brackish water is a tough beast. So it's even a little bit brackish. Its ability to be used as water for your household becomes pretty complex. It's also at a depth that would be difficult, other than having water supply, community water supply would be the only thing that would look at the Haines as an individual. You wouldn't. But water collection, again, using the landscape, dealing when it rains, we collect it all. I look at climate models on a regular basis as part of my work. Oddly enough, it sounds weird, but really a lot of the future models say that it's going to be a more wet future, but it's not going to come when you want it. And so here's the problem, you guys. It's going to come when you didn't want it. Like, you're going to have that wonderful November rain. Have you ever been out in a November rain? November rains suck. Like, that is not what I want rain. And so really having that conversation around other things you can do. I'll be honest with you, I give a presentation on sort of some of the models on what happens if this drought continues, like provincial drought. If it keeps going on and we see we're getting hotter, because I didn't do that part of the presentation, that it's getting hotter and drier. And so if you look at the models, eventually the entire province of Alberta is actually grassland. And have you guys seen like Mad Max, where you're wearing your old hockey equipment and you're fighting for gas? That's what it'll be when we have to use the Haines Formation. That's what I think. Like, when we get to that stage, that's our solution for water, we are wearing old hockey equipment and fighting and using old vehicles and chasing each other for gasoline. Because by the time we get to that, we've got a real problem. That's my guess. As far as filling Gull Lake, pretty political answer, and I will let the public speak on using groundwater to fill a lake. And I'll just let that float. I don't even need to have an opinion on that one.
It's interesting, because I think the Friends of the Blind Man, your take on it is that it does put it into the cycle, right? And it stays in the cycle, it doesn't disappear.
Well, that's water out of the Blind Man River.
Right.
So we don't have.
Oh, right.
That's a complicated issue.
Yeah.
That's a very, so using the Haines to fill Medicine River and Blind Man, that might be something we should do. Like, that's when it gets real weird.
In my conversation last month with Amy Mannix, so she's the policy writer for Rebecca Schultz, the Environment Minister. She's Australian. And so I said to her after we were done, Oscar and I were on the meeting with her, after we were pretty much done the meeting, I said, I know, I can tell you're from Australia. And in Macomb County, once upon a time, about 12 years ago, we hired an environmental coordinator who was from Australia. And she was, part of her job when she first got hired was to tour Macomb County. So she was touring the west end of Macomb County, my division, and we stopped at my house, and she went and used the washroom, and she says, I just can't believe that you Canadians flush drinking water in your toilets. I just cannot believe that. It just boggles my mind, because they flush grey water. And everyone who is from Australia understands water conservation. We may all be heading there. So coincidentally, this Amy Mannix, I told her that, and Amy Mannix is Australian. So it's kind of interesting. I think that hit home with her, and I said, so let's be wise with our water here. So, if there's no other questions, is there one more? Okay.
So this is the old
Yeah, good.
cutting back.
Hang on, Dustin. Yes.
Just, I don't want to over dominate what you're saying. 5-1 was the Blue Jays over. So sorry, 5-1. 5 more touchdowns than the other team.
Is these drilling companies, are you guys cutting back on your drilling program based off the data this year? Because with the shortage of water, if you guys maintain that drilling program, it's be more water consumption, right?
Yeah, and we're dictated. If you noticed last year, the TDLs were stopped in the province, so we're dictated by the rules and the regulations, and we follow those.
So are you guys going to cut back your drilling program?
We will if there's if we get cut off with water.
Okay, so
which we did last year, like they cut off TDL, they regulate the water.
Yeah, we just get a mic here so we can.
Yeah, so they do regulate the water and the restrictions, and exactly like you said, the flows, the rates, everything is dictated in those TDLs. And once those parameters are hit, we're shut down. We're not allowed to divert. you're not given new TDLs, there's quite a bit of restriction on those already. So,
But your drilling program, you can still drill wells and not frack right away. Are you guys gonna keep drilling?
you could do that, but that would be a business model that you'd have to run through, right? You wouldn't sink capital into something if you're not gonna be able to go all the way through with it.
So at
So
what
you
point,
guys are then?
at what point, does a lack of water for fracking drive companies to start making investment decisions on alternatives? Like, might be a good transition right now into the.
Yeah, exactly. We can talk more, like I said, we continually chasing options for reducing fresh water. Like it's something we're on. I don't know when we're supposed to talk about that. But, yeah, it's something that there is a finite amount of water that's allocated to companies, and that drives your business model. We can't just come in and do 100 wells next year. That's not a.
And it's not really fair to the oil and gas companies, like individual ones, to say, you guys need to go way above and beyond all your competition. Like, so is there any momentum from industry to talk to the government about making a level playing field for, this is what the new regulation for freshwater use should be? Because that's what we like, if we actually want a partnership, as Paul was talking about, with industry, because there's definitely water scarcity going on. And we understand, like, you can't expect individual companies to go pay way more money to do the best job when their competition 10 miles down the road isn't doing that, right? And so, like, what is industry doing to lobby government? Because I've heard that there's concerns from industry with AER too, right?
Yeah, the rules have significantly changed year over year. In the last 2 years, there was massive changes to what you're allowed to withdraw from certain sources, and massive impacts to the industry already. Like, there is large changes that have occurred in the last couple of years with regards to drawdown limits.
But has any of that been being advocated for by industry?
What do you?
Well, so that you guys can get like, I mean, like, is anybody from industry advocating for a level playing field with other companies in industry to have better water conservation? So we kind of pick on Parallax and Baytex and Vesta or anybody because you guys are local, right? But it's not your problem. It's the government. Like, I totally agree with you guys. You're getting dictated the rules by the AER. We're saying there's water scarcity, the rules need to change, and we'd like to see companies agree with that and say, yeah, their rules do need to change.
And we're saying the rules have changed. That's what I'm saying. Year over year, in the last couple of years, there's been massive changes to the allowable withdrawal limits in this area.
Based on the graphs, it's not those.
You know what?
Industry consumption.
I think what we'll do is we're going to open up for discussion. So I think some of you guys are available. You guys are willing to hang around and answer a few questions? Because with Jennifer Johnson was wanting to say a few words, the MLA. We will, I think, yeah, people can stick around and have discussion. We're going to make room for that. And then also when it's time to clean up, we'll also ask for some help stacking the chairs and such.
Well, I wasn't really wanting to say something, but after I got followed and told to help with septic systems, what choice do I have? Actually, I do want to thank you, Paul, for saying that, because what Paul said is exactly true. If you've got concerns and questions, send them to your MLA's office. And so I may not be your MLA if it's Legislative Ponoka, but it's 10 minutes down the road to the east. So if it's Mr. Nixon, send them his way. If it's somebody else, send them their way. But send your emails in. That's how lobbying is done. That's how advocacy is done. And we heard from Minister Nixon earlier that you guys are where the action happens, and you guys are what makes it happen. So it's true. I'm here tonight because this is of great interest to me. I'm rural, and I love what you said about that. It doesn't matter to people downtown Calgary. We're farmers. Grew up on a farm, both my husband and I, 100 years back and farther. And this is really important to me.
Maybe a neighbor needs it, so it's something we have presented to industry as an area. So,
Well, thank you. Okay, so some door prizes. We're going to leave discussion now. So please find the person that you want to talk to after we're done.